You know what's strange? When someone asks about your childhood and you just freeze. Not because it was terrible, not because nothing happened, but because somewhere between the age of 7 and 17, you skipped about 15 chapters. And the weirdest part, you didn't even notice you were skipping them. You were too busy making sure everyone else's story kept moving forward. There's this thing that happens when childhood ends before it's supposed to. And I'm not talking about some dramatic, movie-worthy moment. Sometimes it's quieter than that. It's making dinner for your siblings at 9 years old while your parent works a double shift. It's becoming the translator between your parents during their arguments. It's learning to read the room before you learned to read chapter books. It's that specific kind of silence where you're physically present but emotionally somewhere else. Watching, calculating, managing. And here's what nobody tells you. That version of you, the one who had to grow up too fast, doesn't just disappear when you turn 18 or 25 or 30. That part of you is still there, still making decisions, still running the show from behind the curtain, still convinced that if you let your guard down for even a second, everything will fall apart. Let me paint you a picture. There's a child, maybe 8 years old, and overnight they become the most responsible person in their household. Not because they chose to, not because they wanted some early taste of adulthood, but because they had to. And something shifts in them, something fundamental. Psychologists have a term for this: parentification. It's when a child takes on roles and responsibilities that should belong to adults, when they become the emotional caretaker, the mediator, the one who holds it all together. But that clinical term doesn't quite capture it, does it? It doesn't capture the weight of being small and holding up something so much bigger than you. It doesn't capture what it feels like to be 9 years old and responsible for whether your little brother eats dinner, or 12 and monitoring your mother's mood swings like a weather forecast, or 15 and already fluent in the language of crisis management. Dr. Lisa M. Hooper, who's done extensive research on this phenomenon, found something fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. Parentified children often develop what looks like exceptional maturity. Teachers praise them, adults admire them. They seem so together, so capable, so beyond their years. But here's the crucial part. It's not actually maturity. It's a survival adaptation. It's a child's nervous system learning to operate in crisis mode as the default setting. Think about that for a second. Crisis mode as the default setting. That means your body, your brain, your entire way of processing the world got wired around one central question: what needs to be fixed right now? Not what do I need, not what would make me happy, but who needs me? What's about to go wrong? How do I prevent the next disaster? And here's the thing that messes with your head decades later. What felt normal to you was often someone else's crisis. While other kids were learning to ride bikes and having sleepovers and being kids, you were learning to decode adult emotions, manage household logistics, suppress your own needs until they became background noise you barely registered anymore. Now, many people who grew up this way notice they become very good at certain things, frighteningly good. You could read people's emotions like a book. You could sense your parents' mood the second they walked through the door just from the sound of their footsteps. You learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to solve problems before they fully formed. Because the alternative wasn't really an option. The alternative was chaos, instability, things falling apart. These became your superpowers, and for a while, maybe they even made you feel special, capable, needed. But here's where it gets complicated. Those same superpowers you developed, they come with a price tag you didn't know you'd be paying 20 years later. You know what's fascinating? Children who grow up too fast often struggle the most with the simplest things, not the big life challenges, as you might expect. Somehow they can handle a crisis with their eyes closed. Job loss? They're already 3 steps ahead with a backup plan. Relationship ending? They've emotionally prepared for that outcome since week 2. Family emergency? They're the one everyone calls because they just handle it. It's the small stuff that breaks them. Asking for help. Resting without feeling guilty, being silly, being carefree, being, soft. Those feel almost dangerous because when you learned early on that the world doesn't stop for you, that your needs come second, that stability depends entirely on your ability to hold it together, you didn't just learn a lesson, you built an entire operating system around it. And that system is still running right now, in your adult relationships, in your career, in the way you move through the world. Let me tell you what this looks like in adulthood, because maybe you'll recognize yourself here. You become the person others rely on in a crisis, the reliable one, the one who just handles things. And there's a part of you that's proud of that, but there's another part, buried deeper, that's exhausted by it, that wants to scream, "What about me? When do I get to fall apart? When do I get to be the one who needs saving?" But you don't scream that, because being needed feels like love. It's the only kind you learn to recognize. You're attracted to people who need fixing. And I know that makes it sound like you have a savior complex, but it's actually simpler and sadder than that. It's because conditional love feels safer than unconditional love. When someone needs you, you know exactly what your role is. You know how to be valuable. You know the script. But when someone just loves you, no strings attached, no crisis to solve, no role to perform, that feels exposing, uncomfortable, like standing in the middle of an empty room with nowhere to hide. Relationships get tricky for you. Intimacy feels dangerous because being vulnerable was a luxury you couldn't afford back then. So even now, even when you're safe, even when you're with someone who genuinely cares, there's this part of you that cannot, will not let your guard down completely. You might find yourself attracted to emotionally unavailable partners. And before you blame yourself for that, before you spiral into "why do I keep choosing the wrong people?" understand this. Unavailable feels familiar. It feels like home, because home was a place where you gave endlessly and receiving was rare. So when someone offers you consistent love, consistent presence, consistent care without you having to earn it, it might actually feel wrong, uncomfortable, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, like there's some hidden cost you haven't been billed for yet. There's also this thing with control. And no, I'm not talking about being controlling in the toxic sense, though sometimes it can manifest that way too. I'm talking about that deep, primal need to manage every variable in your environment, because unpredictability once meant danger. Chaos meant everything falling apart. So you plan, you overthink, you run through 17 different scenarios before making the smallest decision. And people might call you type A or anxious or a perfectionist, but what they're really seeing is a child who learned that letting their guard down had consequences, real consequences. A child who learned that if they didn't stay 3 steps ahead, something bad would happen. And even though you're not that child anymore, even though the danger has passed, your nervous system didn't get the memo. It's still operating like the house is on fire, like you're still responsible for putting it out. The exhaustion is real, by the way. That bone-deep tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, that's not laziness. That's not weakness. That's what happens when your nervous system has been in overdrive since you were in elementary school. Your body never learned what true rest feels like because rest wasn't safe. Rest meant things might fall apart. Rest meant letting your guard down. And letting your guard down meant, well, you learned not to find out. Here's something that might hit hard. A lot of people who grew up too fast have this weird relationship with success. You achieve things, good things, impressive things. You hit milestones that should feel satisfying, but it never quite feels like enough. There's always this voice saying more, better, faster, prove yourself. Because your worth got tangled up with your usefulness way back when. You learned that love was conditional on what you could provide, what you could fix, how well you could perform. So even now, even when you're objectively successful, there's this underlying terror that if you stop producing, stop achieving, stop being useful, you'll become disposable. And here's the cruel reality. The world actually rewards this. Society loves people who grew up too fast. We're productive, we're independent, we don't need much, we're low maintenance, we get things done, we don't complain, we don't make demands. But nobody asks what it cost us to become this way. Nobody asks about the child we had to abandon to survive. Nobody asks about the parts of ourselves we had to shut down because there simply wasn't room for them in a life built around other people's needs. There's something else that happens too. You become fluent in a language most people never have to learn, the language of emotional labor. You can manage a room full of tension like a conductor leading an orchestra. You can diffuse conflict before it even starts because you've learned to spot it forming in real time. You can make everyone else comfortable while you're drowning inside. And the strangest part? You might not even realize you're doing it anymore. It's just automatic, like breathing. Except breathing is supposed to keep you alive, and this slowly empties you out. You probably have moments where you're surrounded by people, friends, family, coworkers, and you still feel completely alone. Not lonely in the obvious way, alone in the sense that nobody really sees how hard you're working to keep everything smooth, to keep everyone okay. And asking them to notice feels like admitting defeat, like you failed at the one thing you were supposed to be good at, holding it together. So you don't ask, you just keep going, keep managing, keep performing, until one day you realize you don't even know who you are underneath all that performance. You don't know what you actually want because you've spent so long anticipating what everyone else needs. You don't know what brings you joy because joy felt selfish, frivolous, a distraction from the real work of keeping everything from falling apart. And the really messed up part of you is still waiting for permission to rest, permission to need, permission to be messy and imperfect and human. But here's what I need you to understand. That permission you're waiting for, it's never coming from outside. Because the people around you, even the ones who love you, they didn't witness what you survived. They don't know that your competence is a scar. They see someone strong and capable, and they have no reason to question it. They don't see the child underneath, still holding their breath, still waiting for the next disaster. So the permission has to come from you. And I know that feels impossible right now, because giving yourself permission to rest, to need, to fall apart, it feels like betraying that child who worked so hard to keep everything together. It feels like saying their efforts didn't matter. But that's not what healing is. Healing isn't betrayal, it's completion. That child who grew up too fast, they did an incredible job. They were resourceful and strong and brave beyond measure. They kept everyone safe, including you. But they shouldn't have had to. And the fact that they succeeded doesn't mean it was right. It just means they were extraordinary in a situation that never asked that of them. Here's the truth you need to hear. Being needed isn't the same as being valued. Your worth isn't measured by what you produce or how well you manage other people's emotions. You are not a human doing. You're a human being, and being is enough. You're allowed to rest, to not have all the answers for once. You're allowed to be the one who falls apart sometimes, to receive without earning it first. And maybe most importantly, you're allowed to be a beginner at being taken care of, because that's what you are. The fact that you're 30 or 40 or 50 doesn't change that you never really learned how to let someone else hold the weight. So be patient with yourself as you learn. That child who grew up too fast can rest now. They don't have to run the show anymore. It's safe to finally be young at heart, even if you're late to it. You've been holding on so tight for so long. What would it feel like to finally let go? If this story felt like it was written about you, you're not alone in this. There are millions of us walking through the world with this invisible weight, finally learning that we deserved softness all along.